Hello, AP students. It is good to see all of you. Hi, it's me again, Mr. Wood. How you doing? Yeah, probably stressed. Have a lot of homework. Wonder if you're going to sleep tonight. The life of an AP student. All right, well, let's start our new vocabulary. All right, so let's start our new vocabulary, and our first word on our list is going to be Persepolis. First thing you need to know about Persepolis is that Persepolis was the capital of the Persian Empire. So it was the main capital of the Persian Empire. This would have been the Achaemenid Empire, which was the strongest one in the classical era. That's the big one with Cyrus and Darius. It was known as basically the capital of the largest empire in the world at that time. It was the most advanced city. It is known for its 100 columns that were built. It was connected to the Royal Road, which advanced trade. And also about Persepolis, which is good to know, is that Persepolis, as their video will show, many of the buildings that were built there were built by people who made a good wage, who made good money. So Persepolis is pretty historically significant because many of the buildings that were made in Persepolis were by people who were making good money from different faiths, and the workers were well paid, which shows when we talk about hierarchy at this time and social and economic dimensions, then Persepolis at least, there was good wages to be had for people who were working in the city in their empire. All right, let's get to our next word. Our next city and vocab word is Shangjiang. I know it's Shangjiang. Today, the city is called Xian, X-I''A''N. Shangjiang was the Han capital city. That's the first important thing you know. This is where Emperor Wu, or Wu Di, what an awesome name, Wu Di. Sounds like wood. That guy was cool. What was I talking about again? Oh yeah, Shangjiang was the capital of the Han dynasty and was a major starting point for the Silk Road. So from China, this is where a lot of the goods from China would then make their way to other parts of the world. It was a large and cosmopolitan, huge city in Han China, and was a place where the Silk Road basically started on the eastern end and would go all the way to the west, all the way to the Roman Empire at this time in the classical era. Our next word is Jati. Now this is the caste system, and there are different varnas or different castes at different levels, like the Brahmin varna or caste, the Kshatriya, I'm going to say that one wrong, Vaishya, I'm totally butchering that one, the Shudra, and the Untouchables. The Jati was how it was based upon your occupation, the job you did. So the Jati is pretty much the job you did. Like if you were a merchant or a skilled worker, that was your Jati in the caste system, and this was the level where you were. If you were a royalty, if you were a warrior, you were in the Kshatriya caste, and this is where our friend Arjuna was, who didn't want to fight but had to because he had to follow his dharma. So his Jati would be that he was a warrior, he was in the Kshatriya caste. And the Brahmins up here on top, those were the priest, their Jati is their job. This is pretty historically significant because it basically puts people in different jobs and different areas in classical India under Hinduism, which again begins in India with the Vedas that we talked about and becomes even more bigger throughout Indian history. Our next word is slavery, and the slavery we're going to look at in particular came from Rome in this unit. So we're going to be looking at for the social hierarchy, for the economic, social roles in society, that there was slavery that existed in Rome, and slaves could be bought, they could be sold in Rome, and they didn't have their freedoms, they did live with their masters. There was a possibility they could marry into the family, but again, the slaves were definitely a lower class of people in the Roman society who did a lot of the agricultural work, did a lot of servant jobs, and at a point, they made up a very large part of the population in Rome, so much that they were like 1/3 to 1/4 the population of Rome was slaves. Just a side note, often in the United States when we think about slavery, we associate it with the horrors and the absolutely horrible history we have of African American slavery. In Rome, slavery would not have been based on the color of your skin. It would have been based on if your people were defeated, if you were in debt, and other examples like that. The corvée system was a forced system of labor used in China. It was for the peasant or poor workers. Now, it wasn't slavery. These people did have their freedoms, but they were forced to work by the government on certain projects. So like the Great Wall, for example, was built with corvée labor. The Han Dynasty kept this going, and it was a way to break up the classes. It was a way for basically the government to get poor people to build things, so they could require corvée labor of the poor people in China. And it led to a significant for agriculture, for farming, for building defenses like the Great Wall that existed in China. The Huns. The Huns were a nomadic group of people who most likely started off in the area around Mongolia. They were nomadic, pastoral people who rode around and were amazing horseback riders. And they're really significant in this chapter because they are the people who, for the most part, lead to a downfall of our classical empires in China, Han China, for example, in India with the Gupta Empire, and also what we see when they get to Hungary and they invade and lead to the fall of the western half of the Roman Empire. And we'll see that the western half of Rome falls, but the eastern half of Rome actually stays, and it's called the Byzantine Empire and continues for 1,000 years. So the Huns are these outside people who are at the edge of these empires, who are one of the big reasons for the downfall of our imperial empires. Go Huns. All right, the Yellow Turban Revolt. And Ben Friedman of Friedmanpedia gave a really good example right here. I'm just going to kind of go through it, and you can push pause and write some of the notes that are in here right now if you want for this. The Yellow Turban Revolt led to the downfall of the Han Empire. Again, here it says, 30-year period leading to the end. Many agrarian revolts, that means farmers were revolting, probably a lot of these who were under corvée labor. The examples of the Yellow Turban Revolt is the biggest one. There was famine, as we see there. People didn't have enough food. There was floods. So the people had lost, many of the people thought they had lost the mandate of heaven. They thought the government was corrupt. And this was led by a group of Taoists who then had thousands of people. We see 10,000 there, rebelled. And it lasted 20 years. And the Han Empire just couldn't put this thing down. They couldn't stop the revolt from happening. And what happened was their centralized government became a lot weaker because local lords end up getting more power. We look here, we see the Emperor Staudinger brought in a local warlord who then seized power in China. This led to civil war, and officially in 220 CE, we see the downfall of the Han Dynasty because of the Yellow Turban Revolt. And there's definitely corvée labor, flood, famine. The Han Dynasty loses its centralized government to outsiders. China then breaks up into 3 kingdoms. And it's not reunited until we get to the Sui dynasty, which will come up we'll study that more in our next era, in the post-classical era. So that is the Yellow Turban Revolt, a very big factor, interior rebellion revolt in the fall of Han China. Our next word is epidemic. These are like major diseases, like plague, that kill a lot of people. And what we see in the classical era, another one of the downfalls of imperial empires like China, like Rome, is epidemic diseases. We see populations start going down, both in Rome and in China. And one of the biggest things is there was diseases that would come in. Now, why did these diseases come in? One of the downfalls of trade, having large trade routes like the Silk Road, is that when people are trading things back and forth, what happens is also diseases come with the people and kill a lot of the people. Now, if you're wondering why he's talking about the Silk Road so much, it's going to come up in our next section. But with trade comes disease, which kills a lot of people in Han, in the Roman Empire. Mainly we see some in the Gupta, not as much, but we see some there too. But Rome and China have lots of plagues and diseases that spread and lead to their downfall. Okay, Diocletian. Diocletian, what he's really known in history is that he saw that Rome was weakening, and he tried to kind of divide it into different areas where people could still keep control and keep rule. Now, this did lead to Rome becoming more stable for a while, and he is regarded, for the most part, as being a pretty good emperor, although he did persecute a lot of Christians and kill them. Not so good, definitely. And what we see here is he divides Rome into the Western Empire and the Eastern Empire. Now this is going to be really important because this western half is going to fall, and this eastern half is going to get real strong. So the Eastern Empire will get stronger, and you can see there will be a new capital, home of the Diocletian Empire, and you have a co-empire over here. So they'll be kind of like two emperors. That doesn't work for too long because what happens is the East becomes a lot more powerful than the West, and the Western Roman Empire will fall in 476. But the East is going to go on for like another 1,000 years after that, which is crazy. It's going to be called the Byzantine Empire. And we'll get to that in our next era, post-classical. And by the way, the post-classical era, pretty badass. Trust me. Constantine. You should know who this guy is by now. We've talked about Constantine many times. Constantine was a Roman emperor who made the Edict of Milan. And, as you know, he made it legal to be a Christian and eventually led to Christianity becoming the main empire in Rome, which would be very significant because Christianity becomes the largest religion in the world. However, let's talk edicts. Edicts are basically like laws like an emperor makes. So he made his Edict of Milan, which meant that Christianity was legal. Very important. Now here we see where it was written, and a big post here where we had the Edict of Ashoka. I'm not going to give you more information on the Edict of Ashoka, but I think I could tell by looking at this that I think Ashoka's edict may have been bigger than Constantine's. The Byzantine or Byzantine Empire. All right, so this half of the empire, this is the Eastern Empire. This will become the Byzantine Empire. It will not fall. So Western Rome falls. Eastern Rome does not fall. And this will continue for about 1,000 years into the post-classical era. That is the Byzantine Empire. You can also see a map of it right here. The Byzantine Empire. There we go again. So the Byzantine Empire, basically at its peak, there's the Byzantine Empire. It looks like it might try to retake the old western half of the Roman Empire at one point. Doesn't quite work. It mainly is centered right here in that old eastern part of the Roman Empire. And this will continue towards all the way to the end of the classical era until 1453. So until 1453, there is a Byzantine Empire. And they would have considered themselves pretty much Romans. So for them, it's be like, Rome didn't fall for us. We're in the east. We're on that western half over there. Right? That western half over there was the one that fell. Environmental consequences. Anytime you build a very huge empire and you need supplies, there will be environmental consequences. One example of this would be in the Han Empire. The floods and the famine of not having crops led to the fall of the Han dynasty with the Yellow Turban Revolt. Another example that we'll see in Rome, and you'll want to take this sheet and look at it, is this will be in your notes too, is the deforestation. Losing a lot of the forest in Rome led to them losing their wood, which was their main building supply, which is another cause of their empire falling because they don't have enough resources. Okay? Really? The next word is deforestation. Oh, this is just too easy. Deforestation means you lose your forests. It was an environmental consequence. It greatly affected the Roman Empire because they lost their wood, and when they lost their resources, they couldn't build as much, which led to their downfall. That's pretty historically significant. Attila the Hun was a leader of the Huns who challenged and fought Rome on their outside of the border. And actually, the empire Attila built was pretty freaking huge. Actually, about the same size as Rome. However, Attila was never fully able to take over Rome, but because of the Hun attacks, it will lead to the eventual downfall of Rome. One of the reasons why they're very significant, Attila the Hun, is because the outsiders fighting on Rome's border leads to them to fall. And he's an example of outsiders, the Huns, being on the outside of Rome, leading to the fall of the Roman Empire. The Shan came from the same people as the Huns. As we see here, they had a pretty big area of land they ruled, but they were nomadic warriors. We see them there. They were not sedentary. They did not grow crops. They were pastoral people. And they were a pain for China. They were always on China's edge. That's why they built the Great Wall to fight against them. And they were outside people, just like Attila the Hun and the Huns, who fought on the edge of China's empire. And because China spent so much resources trying to fight these people, and then paying them tribute, which didn't work, that they lost a lot of the resources, and this helped lead to the fall of the Han China Empire. All right, everybody, that is it. Only 15 words. I put Huns in there twice, so don't put it the second time. And that is all. Have a good day.